Would you rather drink a wine that is styled like the American actress Angelina Jolie or the French philosopher Bertrand Russell? Do you know how modern winemaking techniques are affecting the wines you drink and why you should care? Our next guest has some provocative and stimulating ideas to change the way you think about the wines you drink. I'm Natalie McLean, editor of Canada's largest wine review site at nataliemclean.com, and we meet here every week at 6 p.m. or 6:30 sometimes when the technology doesn't work, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, Toronto, New York time, and chat with the most intriguing people in the wine world. Now, before I fully introduce our guest tonight, please post in the comments below, which would you rather drink? A wine that's like Angelina Jolie or one that's like Bertrand Russell? You can just post Angelina or Bertrand for short because we're all besties, right? Okay, so, and at the end of this video, I am going to announce who won our giveaway from last week's contest with Dr. Laura Catena for a signed copy of her book, 2 bottles of Catena wines. This week, we are doing the same thing, just so you know. So if you share this video right now, you will be eligible to win a couple of signed copies of this week's guest and a couple of bottles of his wine. So why don't you just do that and get yourself entered? All right, so here we go. Let me read this because I'm going to welcome Clark Smith, who joins me live from California. Hello, Clark. Hi. Thanks for the wave. I almost have to read your intro because it is so fascinating and specific. You've had such an august history, so bear with me. Have a sip of wine while I read. So our guest, Clark Smith, who joins us this evening. I love it because he has created a firestorm in the wine industry, dividing winemakers and wine lovers alike around the idea of wine manipulation. What is that? He's going to answer it. Clark will also explain some of the hottest technologies that help winemaking and how splitting the atom changed the way and the way we make white wine and altered our perception if he doesn't leave us. Anyway, I'm going to go back to this shot. All right. Clark has spent more than 4 decades as a winemaker, author, innovator, musician, and professor in the wine world. He is a product of MIT, UC Davis, and trained over 4,000 winemaking professionals. The IQ Conference named him 2016 Innovator of the Year in the wine world. He holds several patents in winemaking, and his book, Postmodern Winemaking, was named by Wine and Spirits magazine. Okay, wait a minute. He's holding up the book now. All right. Don't do it again. I just went to a 2-shot. You got to hold it up again. Yeah. There you go. Oh, nice expression. His book, Postmodern Winemaking, was named Wine and Spirits magazine's 2013 Wine Book of the Year. Welcome, Clark Smith. Hello. You can wave again if you like.
Hello.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so it's so great to have you here. Thank you for your patience working through all these tech things. That's what happens with live video. It's reality, but it's also what makes this raw, live, and authentic. So I introduced you. I left out things. Tell us more about you and maybe share a little bit also about your personal life, if you would, Clark. Over to you, if you can hear me.
Gee, I guess in a nutshell.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yes, go ahead. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I can hear you.
Well, I guess sure. Mm-hmm. Well, in a nutshell, I'm an East Coast brat from New Jersey, where I picked up my attitude in my Beaver Cleaver years, and then
love it.
Wandered out to California and got a job in a liquor store in 1971, and then that was when the wine industry was really tiny. There were only about 250 wineries in the United States and Canada at that time, and it was a time when you could get to know everybody and taste all the wines. Today, that would be quite impossible. There's over 100 times that many wineries and wines out there now. But there was this kind of explosion. I got pretty excited about it. And in 1976, 1986, I was visiting some wineries in Oregon. I was talking with Bill Fuller at Tualatin, and I just said, I got to get in on this thing. So I think I'm going to stop selling it and start making it. My wife turned to me and said, well, I wondered when you were going to figure that out. So I started with a little winery called Vidercrest that had some vineyards in Napa, and then I went to Davis and finished up the bachelor's and the master's, and then I got hooked up with some growers in the Dunnigan Hills in the Central Valley, and we started a brand called R.H. Phillips, which we started off at about $2 million in debt and 3,000 cases, and then we 17 years later, we were a third of a million cases, and Vincor, a Canadian company, bought us for $94 million. So
yes, now Constellation, now Artera. There's been 3 jumps since then.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh my goodness.
And I don't know. So I explored making, wine at a big winery or creating a big winery. But I noticed that we never made any extra money when we got bigger. We always seemed to make $50,000. When we were 3,000 cases, we made $50,000. When we were a third of a million cases, we made $50,000. So I decided to figure out how small I could get and still make $50,000. And so I make Winesmith now. I started this brand in.
Hold it closer. Hold it closer to the camera. There we go. Now we can see it. Gotcha.
This is Crucible. That's my fancy Napa Cabernet.
Why do you call it Crucible?
Part of it is that I think it's not like a Napa Cabernet. It's not a whap impact wine. I think a lot of Napa Cabernet has gotten to be kind of clown wine, with lots of alcohol and nasty tannins and even sugar. And I like to make something a little more classic. My training's in Bordeaux, and so that's part of it. Part of it is that the tannins are sort of melted, like what a crucible is. It's a little bowl that jewelers use to alloy metals together, and so
I always think of Nathaniel Hawthorne, the crucible, and just testing your metal, whatever.
Yeah, and then there's of course the Arthur Miller play about the Salem witch trial. So there's a bit of dynamic tension in everything I do.
Clearly.
So anyway, so I know I make about 1,000 cases, and I make $50,000. So.
So you're in your sweet spot.
Well, I think it's everybody's. I've told the story 1,000 times, and now we have like 25,000 wineries, and they all kind of make $50,000.
25,000 wineries in California?
No, in North America.
In North America, okay. Wow, I didn't even know there were that many.
Yeah,
okay.
There's about 1,000 in Canada. There's actually 9,000 bonded wineries, but most brands now will make wines together in a custom crush facility.
Like a virtual winery, I think they call it, or a custom label or whatever. Yeah.
We call it tanks, but no tanks.
Like big hat, no cattle.
Exactly. Yeah, right. So anyway, so I did that, and I started. At the end of Phillips, I think I was making really good modern white wines, and my red wines were kind of awful.
Why?
And I think it was because of this idea that we had been taught in school, in winemaker school, that wine is a chemical solution, and I've come to realize that that's not true.
What do you mean by chemical solution?
Well, just like water and alcohol with a bunch of stuff dissolved in it.
So it can be scientifically defined, or a recipe, or whatever.
Yeah, through, in other words, just a random mix, like soda pop. But actually, I've come to realize that that it has a structure, the way like a béarnaise sauce has a structure, or a bisque has a structure. Would you rather have a vegetable consommé or a lobster bisque? You know what I'm talking about? The bisque is much more soulful, and that's because it has suspended gouge in it. It has a
suspended what?
watery part
Did you say gooch?
Well, whatever you want to call it.
I thought it was a technical term. Sorry,
yeah.
gooch. Yeah, I love the taste of gooch.
It's a jargon term, gooch.
Yeah, I do.
Sounds nicer than crap.
Okay, let's keep going.
But if you compare, like a consomme is basically a solution of vegetable flavors.
Right.
Whereas a
I like
feast has a fatty part and a watery part, and they're very finely blended together. And so that allows that feast to have a whole lot of different flavors all married together like a symphony orchestra, and that's what makes it much more soulful than a consomme could ever be.
Oh, and you know your music, which is a whole other topic which we can dive into tonight. Now, tell me, we missed the whole part because I know you shared some of your personal life. Tell me a little bit of that, if you're willing to share it with the group here tonight about.
I don't know. I live in Santa Rosa, California, and I make wines all over California, and I have about 100 clients scattered around the U.S. and Canada and some overseas. I'm very, very musical. I'm in a barbershop quartet and a Robert Shaw chorale, and I'm actually the president of the Redwood Chordsmen, which is our local barbershop chorus, and then I sing in my wife's church choir.
You just got married.
I just got married. Her name is Ruthie Wells, and she's extremely wonderful and a great singer, composer, and musical director.
Sounds very harmonious. Yes.
Yeah, it's all right.
All right, I want to welcome our guest tonight. I know, Clark, you can't see this, so I'm going to read you comments as they come in, but Paul, he's joining us from Virginia, Paul and Patty, and what is he saying? We've had her rosé, pretty good. Oh, Angelina's rosé. We will talk more about what that means, Paul, in a minute. Gwen has joined us, Anne has joined us, and then the comments are sliding so fast, I can only see 4 or 5 at a time, so I should also just bring people into the conversation as they're appearing. So folks, if you're just joining us, you're here live with us on the Sunday Sipper Club. Natalie McLean, editor of Canada's largest wine review site, and we're here with Clark Smith, who is an innovator, pioneer, very provocative thinker in a terrific way. Please post in the comments below where you're logging in from, and also if you share this video, Clark has provided a couple of signed copies of his book for us tonight and a couple of his wines. Now, we are going to divide up this prize tonight because of the wonderful shipping laws between countries and so on. So for those of you in the U.S., you can win a couple of bottles of his wine, and for those of you anywhere else, including Canada, you can win a couple of personally signed copies of Clark's book. You also want to click on the follow button if you want to get notified for the next time we go live. And Elaine Bruce has joined us, and she asks to you, Clark, what is your favorite or most memorable innovation? You're such an innovator. We would love to hear kind of what stands out for you. You've got patents, all kinds of things, so tell us.
I think the most important thing that I've ever worked up was this oxygen appetite thing. We've got this gizmo, costs about $10,000, and what it does is it looks through the bottle. We glue a dot on the inside of the glass, and it can measure the oxygen content inside of a bottle of wine without opening it up. So that allows us to look at how fast that's changing and make predictions about how long a wine can age. Just kind of how much testosterone it's got.
Is that at all linked to micro-oxygenation? I mean, we've got a broad audience here tonight. They're not techies. Some of them are, I'm sure, but we want to keep it broad and open. So I'm going to ask you questions.
Well, a little bit. I can explain micro-ox really easily. It's just like we take tannin, and wine has red. We're talking about red wine, so they have a lot of young, unstructured tannin when they're young, and they also have all these yeast leaves. When you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separate the yolk from the white. And when you make a souffle, you separ Now the whites are like the tannins, all right? So we're gonna make those tannins into a rich, light, stable structure with a wire whisk, right? Only we use oxygen to turn the tannins into a rich, light structure. So we end up with a wine that has more volume in the mouth and is more refined, but also ages longer.
Because you separated the tannins somehow?
Well, if we have the lees present when we do this, it doesn't work. Because the lees just gobble up all the oxygen. So that's a little bit like when you try to make a souffle. You have to make a meringue first, and then you can fold the yolks back in for fatness and richness. That's what we do with yeast lees, but we have to wait until we've built the structure or the whole thing doesn't work. So there's a timing issue. So we're able, wine is kind of homeopathic. So if we challenge the wine with oxygen when it's young, it gets stronger and it can age a lot longer. So we're not oxidizing the wine, we're building its structure using oxygen. And so it would be handy to be able to measure how much chi, how much life energy that wine has, so that it could be that it's a wine you just made and you want to know which program to put it in, or whether it needs blending, or it could be something you're just about to bottle and you want to see if it's ready to bottle, or if it's going to get reductive in the bottle and get all stinky and close up on you. Or let's just say you're thinking about you're at a wine auction and you're thinking about you see a case of 1970 Latour, Chateau Latour, and you'd like to know whether it's dead or not. We can measure that. All those things by looking at the wine's oxygen appetite. So I think that's a really cool thing to be able to do.
That is, and I'm sort of grasping it, though I'll probably have to replay this video to hear your words again. It sounds to me it's like putting your 3-year-old in the playground, letting them eat dirt to build up resistance. Anyway.
Yeah, it is kind of like that. So any of this stuff, I have a website, whoisclarksmith.com.
Okay.
And it's got the geeky stuff and the postmodern stuff and the wine and music stuff and stories about the wines and videos about the wines and all that stuff. Just that's Grand Central Station for Clark
Absolutely.
Smith.
We're going to mention that a few times.
ClarkSmith.com. Yeah.
That is the question. And but you've got some great videos on there and some great resources from layman to techie, and I do recommend people come to it. Oh, Elaine said, "Oh my gosh."
Maybe I ought to kick in this movie analogy.
Go ahead.
That you've been alluding to. I'm not quite sure how Angelina Jolie got into it, but
that's from an article that was about you. But anyway, go ahead.
I do think every consumer ought to, every time they open up a bottle of wine, they ought to start trying to speculate about what the winemaker was trying to do. And that's really just like Netflix. There's kind of 3 kinds of movies. You got your Disney comedies to make you smile, and so those are wines that are trying to shoot your basket. They're
happily ever after.
They're going, okay, please me. I have desires. I have loves. Please me. So there are wines that are designed to do that, and they often have sugar or a lot of oak or something like that. And the point of the wine is not really about the wine at all. It's just about kind of stroking the consumer.
Sure.
Then you've got the action adventure wines. Sort of like Claude Van Damme movies.
Vin Diesel. No, that'd be Vin Diesel.
Vin Diesel and Bruce Willis and all of those guys. And that's those wines aren't even supposed to be particularly pleasant, but they're supposed to really impress you. And I think that's kind of what's happened to Napa Cabernet, is that it's so expensive that people think, well, for the $300 a bottle, you ought to slap me around a little bit. So those are impact wines. The whole idea is that you taste it and you go, wow,
Boom.
So I don't make wines like that at all. I don't knock your socks off when you taste my wines. You'll still be fully clothed, but I kind of hope that you'll be sorry when it's gone. So that's a little bit more like dramas and foreign films. where you kind of have to talk yourself into even trying them, and then but those be the movies that at the end you go, oh yeah, okay, that's 5 stars. I really
you had to read the subtitles, but you remember the plot.
Right, exactly. So you have to work at it a little bit, and I think I really love Cabernet Franc, and one of the things I like about it is that you have to work at it. That you have to shoot the wines basket. Just like if you were, listening to Mozart or rap, you go, well, a lot of people love this. I wonder what it is they love about it, and you have to investigate instead of just sticking with your own little tastes that you had when you were 5 years old. You could start delving into different kinds of pleasure that you might not have seen.
Or for grown-ups. So you segued nicely. I've got Cave Spring Cabernet Franc from Niagara. What is it about Cabernet Franc you love so much? Because I watched your video on that, which was excellent. But tell us a little bit why you love Cab Franc.
Well, Cabernet Franc is the father of Cabernet Sauvignon.
Okay.
Sauvignon Blanc is the mother. That's a little weird because, Cabernet Sauvignon is a big boy. And I kind of think of it like Cabernet Sauvignon will always be generous. It'll be rich and dense and muscular. And if it's made right, in other words, kind of like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and maybe you can put him in a nice tux, but Cabernet Franc's more like Jamie Lee Curtis, a lot more floors on the intellectual elevator, leaner and, more energetic and a little smarter. And so Cabernet Sauvignon is generous and broad. Cabernet Franc is energetic and deep.
Right, and
it also ages a lot longer. Even though it's not a big wine. Well, we're not really sure. It's a very vigorous vine, and if you can convince it in a poor soil to put that energy into a root system, then it'll pull all kinds of minerality out of the soil. And we're not quite sure what minerality is. I got a whole chapter in my book, but it doesn't really say anything. We just don't know what it is. We know what kinds of soils it comes on, and that organic practices can support it. It's a kind of an energy. I'm not talking about the smell of wet stone. I'm talking about this buzz in the finish, which is often confused with acidity.
Yeah, I've heard that before. I'm just still in search of a good definition.
Well, people will talk about Mosels. They go, well, geez, these are pencil thin little wines, but they age 30 years because of the acidity. And that's not true. Because we can make wines with just as much acidity, but they don't age very well at all. It's really, it's like acid. It's that same kind of tingle, but it's in the throat. And all Portuguese ports have it because they're always by law grown on schist. Pretty much all Burgundies have it because they're grown on limestone. So
schist, just for those who don't know, how is that related to soil? Is that like limestone? What is that, schist?
Oh, schist is it's iron containing sediments that were stacked on top of each other, and then through tectonic plate action they get turned up like this.
Oh.
So it's a soil. It's like a granite that's on its side.
Oh, and
many
the roots go
features down through the slots. It's very rare, but the whole region of where in the Douro, where port is made is all schist. That's the first appellation in history, and in fact, it was a beheading offense to try to sell grapes from off of the schist. The Marquis de Pombal would cut your head off. Yeah.
Who would cut your head off?
The Marquis de Pombal. This little town in the middle of the world.
It's rather drastic. Okay.
But they took it seriously, is all I'm saying. So I don't know why. I mean, I make this faux Chablis. It's a Chardonnay from Napa.
Okay. Why did faux Chablis? Because you're recognizing it's not Chablis. It's made from Chardonnay unoaked, I assume.
Right. Well, I use some untoasted oak, but it doesn't have any toast or butter. I don't take it through malolactic. And the current vintage is 2005.
Okay.
it takes 12 years for it to come around in the bottle.
So you don't release it for that long?
Yeah.
Wow. That's how you stick to 50,000 a year, I'm sure. Like you've tied it all up in your cellar.
Yeah. Well, it just isn't ready, but I think it's kind of a miraculous wine. But it's the minerality, I'm convinced, that makes it age that long. And again, we really don't know chemically what's going on, but I hope to with them.
Oh, I'd like to hear more about that throat energy, though. I like that versus just plain old acidity. I'd like to welcome Laurie Kilmartin. There's been other people who've joined us that's just been going by. I'm sure I will go back and watch what I missed. Yes, Laurie, we started late, so that's okay. You won't miss. And Laurie, you're going to want to hang around for the end of this broadcast because I have some good news for you. Late to the party. Okay, no worries. Okay, so Clark, you wanted me to pick up a couple of Cabernet Francs because you love them, but also you asked me to get a Niagara Cabernet Franc. So I got Cave Spring. Mm-hmm. And you want to talk about the way Cabernet Franc is treated in different regions. The other one I was able to pick up was from mostly Saint-Emilion, so it has a large percentage of Cabernet Franc, with with Merlot, I think. I can't read the percentage.
Yeah, they're usually about 2/3 Cab Franc, 1/3 Merlot.
Now, what are we looking for when we look at the differences in how Cab Franc is treated, say in these regions, and there's more. I tried to find a Loire Valley Cabernet Franc. Our dear LCBO did not have them. Talk about these two.
Yeah, well, let's start with the Loire versus Saint-Emilion. That's a good place to start.
Sure.
In the Loire, you want here's this is the whole basis of postmodernism is that let's just say Chateau Latour makes a lousy Beaujolais. So,
what do you mean by that? Wrong grape in the right region?
Right. That there's no such thing as good wine. What there is good for the moment, good for the occasion,
good for the region,
appropriate to the terroir. Sure. And you're not supposed to make big, heavy, long aging wines in Beaujolais. You're supposed to make light, fruity picnic wines. And if you had a picnic and you took a young bottle of Chateau Latour out there, it'd be awful.
Be the end of the date.
Yeah, so, and I really do think that California's really, and Canada too, really missing the boat.
On Cabernet Franc?
Well, in general, trying to market our wines based on varietal naming rather than place naming. Europe's grown way beyond that now. And so, it would be silly in France to do a Cabernet Franc tasting. Because you'd never know. You need to know which ones are the Chinons and the Bourgognons, because those are supposed to be steely, just very masculine, piercing kind of cold wines. Whereas a Saint-Emilion is always very feminine, very generous. The sort of lamb fat from the Merlot fills in the cracks, and you end up with very round, warm, comforting wines. So their job is just completely different. They're both Cabernet Francs, but it's silly to speak of them that way because there's more variation between the two regions than the single varietal name would indicate.
It's more accounted for the region than the grape.
Yeah, I really think so. And we don't even think of wines that way in North America. We just go, oh, well, I had a Chardonnay. Okay, well, what kind of Chardonnay? Where was it from? And Cabernet Franc probably varies from region to region more than any other grape. So Niagara is really interesting because if it's grown right, it's very fleshy. It has a lot of color.
This does.
And some roundness to it.
Yeah.
That's a pure Cabernet Franc there.
It is.
And yet
so good.
But it will still have this edge. Really.
It does. It's not flabby.
If I had to compare it to a French wine, I'd say it's more like a Grave. Pretty much pure Cab
really?
Franc.
You would go there. Okay.
Well, certainly it's not as steely as a Loire wine.
Yeah.
And not as fat, feminine as a Saint-Emilion. So.
Okay.
I'm a little more manly.
Okay. That's really interesting. So yeah, no, we're really pushing Cab Franc in Canada, especially Ontario. There's a movement here between Gamay and Cab
It's a perfect
Franc.
fit for the area.
It is. The cool climate really does well.
I really like the ones up in Prince Edward County, too.
Yes, absolutely. That is an exploding, exciting region. There's so many great wineries up there. There's 30 now, and a number of them are doing Cab Franc. Yeah, absolutely. So let's get back to you, Clark. Can you take us back to the moment when you knew you wanted to make wine? Kind of where were you? How did you feel? What was the moment you said, I need to make wine?
Well, the reason I dropped out of MIT is I just couldn't decide what I wanted to do. There were so many wonderful possibilities there. And I just, Francis Crick and Noam Chomsky and Lorianne Toiber and Leacock and Pierce and Edmund Land, all these people were my freshman teachers. It was crazy.
It's amazing.
And I just couldn't pick something. And then when I was selling wine, it was just a job at first. But then I started to see this huge multiplicity. And then I realized that it was an unexplored area, that none of us knew what we were doing. That's because, it just comes back to this modern wine thing that in 1960, 95% of the wine made in California, which is basically the wine made in the United States, was port and sherry.
Right.
We really didn't have any table wine.
Sure.
We, even in '76, when Chateau Montelino won the tasting in Paris, there were only 11 acres of Chardonnay in the Napa Valley, and that wine was from Sonoma. We didn't know anything, and our wines were sort of terrible. Half the wine on the shelf back then would have been considered unmerchantable today. So we were learning, and I thought that was really cool. And we were growing. It seemed like a way to make a contribution. And I guess what attracts me to wine, just like music, is that it's science in service to art. It's highly technical, but in the end, it's really about communicating soul to soul.
Oh.
It's very human.
I love that. It's the intersection, that science and humanity. Even Steve Jobs talked about that. The best brings together those two worlds.
Yeah. And I think, in the end, the human connection is, even in science, the human connection is really what it's all about. And I think scientists ought to spend a lot more time thinking about their relationship to observation as humans, and what observation really is, and then also the social consequences of discoveries.
Absolutely. There's been so much talk about that. Like, I'm not going to get off track, but with the Google memo from that engineer coming out going, soft skills, actually, it's where they meet, and we undervalue.
Right. I actually think that what we call the hard sciences are really soft, and the soft sciences are really the hard sciences, because they get closer to what's actually going on, which is a human enterprise.
The human. The front
end. I'm actually writing, my next book is called The Myth of Science. I just got back from a month in Ireland writing that.
Excellent.
I'll be out in a year or two.
So amazing. Hold up your book. Good, nice segue. Have you written several? So this is Postmodern Winemaking. This is the one that was the 2013 Wine Book of the Year by Wine and Spirits Magazine. So
and we got to the top of Eric Asimov's list for the
New York Times
5 top books of the Times. And,
woohoo!
It did well.
Good for you.
Yeah, that's my first published book. I've been writing articles for 40 years, but anyway, the next one will be called The Myth of Science. The
Myth of Science. We look forward to it. And so, folks, if you take a moment to share this video right now, hit the share button. You could win a couple of copies of Clark Smith's signed copies of Clark Smith's books, as well as his wines. We're going to make the wines going to people in the States, but the books for everywhere else, just because of shipping guidelines. So all you have to do is share. That's it. And you may also want to click on follow at the top of this page so that you know when we go live every week. So Clark, you have caused lots of controversy in the wine world, which is, I always love to talk to someone who is interesting like you. why have people polarized around your views? The whole wine manipulation thing, what is that, if you can sort of boil it down for us? And why are people all in a kerfuffle about that?
Well, I think it's really our fault as winemakers when we, in the 70s, when, like I said, we didn't know what we were doing. So we were all talking to each other, and it was a very, very open industry. As we started to get more competitive, and also all this new technology started coming out, and it used to be that everybody that drank wine was a geek. And you could talk to them about very complex things. Now it's gotten sort of dumbed down more and more, and so we're reluctant to kind of drag people through the dirt of technical conversations that they may not really have the bandwidth for. And so we've been perfectly comfortable for them to think, Lucy stomps the grapes, and then we put some vodka in it, and that's wine. That's what most people think wine is.
Huh.
And we haven't done very much to educate the public. I think we were a little remiss in that. And particularly when some of these, here's what's weird, is that winemaking changed completely and forever right around World War II, at the same time as the American kitchen. Refrigerators, stainless steel, electricity, lights. That's all brand new. Wineries never had any of that stuff.
Temperature control, fermentation.
Stainless steel. This was the big revolution. Nobody ever even noticed it because we all grew up with these kitchen appliances and stuff, and we were perfectly comfortable with electric lights and stainless steel and refrigeration. It doesn't seem like technology, but it completely changed the way we make wine. But then some stuff got a little geekier, like reverse osmosis and enological uses of oxygen, when everybody had been taught that oxygen was the enemy of wine, and it just got kind of complicated. So people just stopped talking about it, and I invented, for example, a way to take acetic acid out of wine, basically vinegar.
Why would we want to do that? Is it a fault?
Yeah, sure. It's a sourness in the finish. But the weird thing is that the grapes that turn to vinegar are the best grapes.
Like which ones?
Well, like really good Napa Cabernets, for example. The birds will go find the best vineyard and attack it, and that's where the bacteria comes from. So mostly we were dealing with really high-end wines that had spoiled, and we figured out a way to take the acetic acid out. Well, nobody really wants to talk about that, sort of open heart surgery. So we just kind of got in the habit of becoming more and more secretive, and more just saying, I do the minimum, whatever that is.
Right, that's a mantra. I pick between the raindrops, and I'm non-interventionist.
Well, I know thousands of winemakers, and believe me, they're all sweating bullets 24/7, 365. And I think we're really dissing on ourselves. Mm-hmm. That winemakers work really hard, and I do think that it's important for the winemaker's work to be invisible.
And what do you mean by that? Like, just don't.
The influence of the winemaker. For me,
yeah.
I want to show the grapes. If I'm going to use oak, I want it to be invisible. I want it to be in support. It's sort of like cosmetics, To me, the most skillful, if a woman's putting makeup on, it's great if you can't tell she's wearing it.
Right.
And it's just enhances in some subtle ways. So that's kind of the way I like to work with wine, and it's a lot of work to be invisible.
Yep.
It's not like there's wines of effort. Randall Graham's one of my best friends, but he's always talking about vin de fol and vin de terroir. And excuse me, but it takes a lot of effort to make vin de terroir. Anyway, we're just chefs. We're cooks.
Yeah.
Winemaking's a fancy form of canning.
Ooh, that's gonna.
It is. It's preserving fruit.
Okay.
And so, uh, you know, all wine is very highly manipulated. Uh, those aren't grapes in the glass.
What are they?
Well, it's wine. You know, we crush it, we press it, we ferment it, we age it, we do all kinds of stuff.
You've handled it, yeah.
And that's the definition of manipulation, meaning handling with skill. Well, that's it's a synonym for artisanality, and everybody admires that.
Yeah.
But it's this idea of deceit that comes in with manipulation, manipulating for your own purposes, that gets in there, and I think it's just got to stop. I feel quite insulted when people talk about this. Now, they'll usually be talking about wines that are badly made, okay. And I'm not in favor of bad cooking, but right. if you make the whole idea of intentionality in making wine into a crime, then people will be poorly educated about it, and they'll make shitty wine, and that's what's happening. And the whole natural wine movement mostly is coming from a stance, and I respect it, that wine has a sacredness to it that beer and spirits really don't have. I mean, nobody ever gives brewers any shit about manipulation, because that's the essence of making beer. But I do think that they're getting at something, and I also don't think that we've been very forthright in bragging about what we do. The way Wolfgang Puck gets on TV and he'll say, well, I've got this really ripe brie, but I want to grate it, and so I'm going to freeze it with liquid nitrogen. You want to watch?
And they take pride in that, how I'm going to change this ingredient.
And we should too. I mean, I've developed a lot of new techniques and stuff, but I always tell people, don't ever do anything that you don't want to brag about. And then brag about it, and share it with people, because you're having fun,
Absolutely.
And, we should talk about, instead, you go, oh, I do the minimum. It's disgusting. I feel like accusing a winemaker of manipulation is like calling your wife a whore because she's sleeping with you.
There's a good metaphor. And that's a... No,
she's supposed to do her duty, and then she's supposed to feel bad about it, The heck with you guys.
Wow. Okay, back to the comments. So, that's interesting. So Paul is saying, what made you think of reverse osmosis? And before Lori falls off the screen with her comment, she likes your wine rack. She's wondering, do you stock it with anything in particular? So your choice. Do you want to answer what's in your wine rack?
I didn't understand the second one.
Okay. Paul is asking, what made you think of reverse osmosis?
Oh yeah, well that was I didn't even know what reverse osmosis was when I first hung out my consulting shingle in 1990.
Okay.
I was going to work for the Benzigers. Well, Bruno Benziger's liver had gone bad on him, and his doctor told him he had to quit drinking. So he got really interested in non-alcoholic wine and went out and bought a reverse osmosis unit. And I got put in charge of trying to develop non-alcoholic wine, that's where I really started to learn that wine is not just a collection of flavors, because, with non-alcoholic wine, you can add anything you want. And it's like soda pop, there's no laws about adding flavors, but it didn't work because the wine didn't have any structure. That was because the beginning of learning.
No alcohol?
No, it's just that if you don't build the structure, you're not going to have one. Like the difference between a scrambled egg and a souffle. One has structure and the other's just kind of a mixture.
That's good.
So that was the beginning of that. But anyway, when I was horsing around with this reverse osmosis, what it basically is just a really, really tight filter so that all the color and flavor and tannin in the wine stays on the upstream side, and you just get water and alcohol, very, very small molecules. And the other one is acetic acid. So I said, well, I was giving a talk about sort of technical approaches to winemaking and flavor harvesting and that kind of stuff, because we're very wasteful in the wine industry. We never try to get all the flavor out of the skins, or we lose a lot of aromas out of the fermentation vessels. We just, maybe half of the flavor that we start with we get to keep. So I was giving a lecture about how we could go about making better wines by retaining those flavors. And then I said, well, what if we got a flavor in the wine that we don't want? Maybe we could figure out a way to get it out. And so this was the example I came up with, that you could just take that RO permeate that looks like water and run it through a water softener, and it would just take the acetic acid out. And then you just put the water and the alcohol back, and you can take vinegar out of wine. And I didn't think any more about it for a couple of months. And then one of the guys that had been at the lecture said, "Well, we got this Merlot that's got a lot of VA and it's stuff."
Volatile acidity, yeah.
Yeah, that's the winemaker code for vinegar. So we tried it, and it worked like a charm. The wine went dry, and it was wonderful. And
so this is spinning out elements that you don't want. Reverse osmosis is spinning off. I don't know.
I think you're
alcohol.
trying to make the word spinning. I think you're confusing it with a spinning cone.
Yeah, maybe. But I'm trying to put it in layman's terms. So why don't you do that rather than me?
Well, sure. Let me give me a second. I'll get a bottle of permeate and see what I'm talking about.
All right. While we wait for Clark, let me pay attention more to your comments here. So, Lori, we will come back to what is in Clark's wine rack, and does he stock it with anything in particular? Gwen, I see your comment. I see they're actually selling wine in a can, like a pop can. Blech.
Okay, there we go. So,
okay. Oh, he's back.
This
yes.
is Napa Cabernet.
What'd you do to it?
That's what comes through the filter. If I take a wine like this.
Yeah, and put it through reverse osmosis?
Yeah, the wine doesn't go through the filter. It just bleeds off some of this stuff, as we call it.
What is that stuff? What is it, water?
It's just water and a little alcohol and acetic acid, and that's it.
You're trying to lower the alcohol.
Well, maybe I am and maybe I'm not. When we're taking out VA, all we do is take the acid out of this and put the water and the alcohol back.
Oh.
But in California, we do have the problem that our air is too dry. And so water evaporates from the grapes. Doesn't do that in New York, Virginia. They make much more balanced wines than we do. France has too much water, so they have to add sugar to correct the alcohol. We need to take alcohol out. So the way we do it is to just take this stuff and run it through a still, take the alcohol out, put the water back.
Why is that disturbing so many people?
Because we don't talk about it, and they figure if we're not going to talk about it, then it must be evil.
Why are we not talking about it? Why do they think it's evil?
Well, I think it's kind of spun around to something very much like a bad marriage, where the two partners are pissed off at each other because they're not talking, and they're not talking because they're pissed off, and it's just kind of a vicious circle at this point. And I'm trying to break that. I'm trying to say, look, we can talk to you about these things. Part of it is simply respecting the consumer's intelligence. That we're living in a world where I'm constantly being told to just dumb down everything, and I think it's a big mistake. Why don't we just tell people the truth?
What would happen? Would people really understand or get? They're scared about genetically modified and all this kind of stuff. It's like ingredient labeling. Okay.
Yeah, sure. But I think what happens is you have conversations. And
fair enough.
And it can't get any worse than it already is. I don't think it can hurt for us to talk, but it does mean that the consumer has to hold up their end. Just like two people trying to come back together and heal a bad marriage, they each have to make room for the other to tell the truth.
Wow. Okay, I love that. Okay. We went down so far on a path here. I'm just going to go back to Gwen. I see some are actually selling wine in a can. Okay. Not sure where you're coming from there, Gwen, but keep elaborating so I understand better. And already we've almost hit the hour mark, Clark. This is fascinating. I could do an epic series with you. It's already 7:30. Is there, I much as I don't want to, but is there anything you want to talk about now, and there's no rush, that we haven't covered? Is there anything you want to dive into?
Well, I thought you sent me a list of questions.
Yeah, there was a long list. So
yeah.
So tell me, I've got
one
ones.
of them was like, what was the big moment for me?
Yes, please share.
And in 2011, I got invited to join a delegation from the U.S. State Department to the Republic of Georgia.
Oh, okay.
And in Georgia, there's really there's no distinction between religion and wine.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the best winemaker in Georgia is the Archbishop of Kakheti, a guy named David Avardelli, and he's over there in his 6th century monastery making the best Briccazzelli on earth. And to sit with him and really get it, just how deeply they feel that winemaking is an extremely spiritual endeavor that has a place in morality and ethics, in God's love and all that stuff, was really inspiring to me. Huh. Plus he makes really good wine. So that was kind of my high point.
Amen to that. Okay, and I don't know if this is a fair enough question as we're trying to wrap up, but you talked about the 4 styles of white winemaking.
Oh yeah. Well, we got into it a little bit, so yeah. I guess we're touching on that. So what do you got there?
I've got a Greek Santorini volcanic soils. I have a Sauvignon Blanc.
Okay, let's start with that. The New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah, Kim Crawford.
So we're going to do these in reverse historical order.
Okay.
So that's the most modern style, and
yes.
that is a child of Blue Nun.
Really?
You get Hitler, you get the bomb, you get bubble pointable sterile filters. So now we can bottle sweet wines, and then you get Peter Schischel inventing Blue Nun, which was the first off-dry modern white wine.
Okay.
Before about 1960, there was no such wine in the world. White wine was not fresh. But he put together the whole idea of inert gas and cool fermentations and stainless steel and refrigeration and sterile filtration to make a brand new kind of wine that nobody had ever seen before, and it transformed the planet. So in California, for example, we went from making 95% port and sherry in 1960 to making 95% light, low alcohol, off-dry white wines.
Okay.
That was the whole industry in 1970, and that's a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon here and there. And then that revolution went all the way around the world to New Zealand, where they taught them to make Sauvignon Blancs the same way. Maybe they don't have sugar, but everything else about making a fresh wine is right there. Now, that doesn't work when you're trying to make aromatic varieties like German Riesling, because those grapes have terpenes and they're really delicious on the vine, so birds and bees love to attack them. So in the Mosel, what they'll do is brown the juice. They'll just
oxidize it?
Yeah, they oxidize the juice before they do the fermentation. They'll pump oxygen into it and get all of that browning to happen before fermentation. So what you end up with is a really light green, delicate wine that can age forever. And that's the difference between method 1 and method 2. The Sauvignon Blanc is going to die like a dog in a year or 2, right? Yeah. But that Mosel will last maybe 30 years.
Okay.
Now, those are the 2 post-World War II modern white wine styles. Just before World War II, we started making, I think I asked you to get a Surly Muscadet. Were you able to find one of those?
I did my homework. There you go.
Yeah, so there you go. And this could also apply to Chablis or Savinier or Chenin Blanc. Chenin Blanc has a lot of tannin, and so we'll use the tannin and we'll stir lees to coat the tannins, to put protein, to put sort of pajamas on those tannins. And then we end up with something that's more like a red wine because it has a structure. So then it can integrate aromas and be more soulful, just like we were talking about that Lobster Bees. So that's the way white wine used to be before World War II. And then way back when, starting at about 6,000 or 7,000 BC and all the way through Roman times, method 4, the wines were made in clay jars in the ground. With usually, this is white wine, at least 6 months of contact with the skins, stems, and seeds. So they were sort of like alcoholic teas, very aromatic and complex, long aging wines, but by no means fresh. They weren't fresh, light, delicate, easy drinking wines. They were very serious, big, solid, long aging wines.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So, Clark, I think, excuse me, we're back to some internet trouble, but so I think we're no, that's okay. We've had a great discussion. I think we're going to wrap this up, though. I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to post the links to where your books are and your site and everything else. And this has been a magnificent discussion. I'm sure if people didn't catch us live, they will catch us on the replay, so that will be pretty amazing and educational. So I want to thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you so very much for having me.
All right. Take care.
Good
Bye
night,
for now.
Canada.
Good night, Clark.